thank you very much for joining us here on AU Manufacturing Conversations. Good to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me.
A pleasure. First question, as always, is how did you get here and what do you make?
How did I get here? I suppose I'm an engineer that is working on building quantum computers in silicon. How did I get here is actually a bit of a long story. How much time do we have?
All the time you need.
I came through engineering, through electrical engineering, through a bachelor's and a PhD, and then found myself working with a team doing quantum computing and really loved that and got really into it. So now I found myself working with a new startup, Diraq, who's working on building on quantum computers in silicon in Sydney.
That's it in a nutshell, but your humble sort of recap of your career didn't take in a lot of fairly interesting details. We don't need all of them, but I stalked you on LinkedIn and I noticed you started with mining engineering. You've got some, like you said, electronics engineering in there. You've presumably worked as a musician, but you studied music at the Conservatorium of Music in Sydney. Pretty impressive and pretty unrelated stuff. Tell me about, what happened and why the pivots in career. You're just looking for something that kept you stimulated, perhaps?
So way back when I was finishing high school, I was really keen on getting into engineering. I found myself in mining engineering. That didn't quite tickle the itch for me, and I was really into music. So I actually found when I dived into university straight out of high school, I was actually spending way more time on music than I was on my degree. And I was thinking seriously about it. Do I want to have a go at that? And I thought, all right, I'll audition for the Conservatorium. And if I get in, all right, that'll mean that maybe I'm okay at this and I'll have a crack at it. And then I got in. I went through a full Bachelor's of Performance degree there, doing jazz performance.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, had a lot of fun doing that. Basically lived and worked as a professional musician and music teacher for a number of years. And I still play. It's more of a hobby now, I suppose, but still a big part of my life. It's a bit of a tough profession, music, which maybe wouldn't be surprising. It's a lot of hustle and a lot of travel and lots of varied work.
The economics of it aren't great. A hack musician, certainly not of the caliber of a conservatorium graduate, but I've dabbled a bit and, playing a gig doesn't really result in very much money for what ends up being a hell of a lot of effort.
Yeah. And a lot of the time the pathway is through music teaching.
Yep.
It's really where your stability comes from, which I enjoy a lot. But I guess I was lucky in the sense that I also have a love for engineering. And when I was at the tail end of working as a musician, I got back into a job working as a technician in electronics, which I'd done on and off. And that got me back interested in engineering again. And I went from that into a Bachelor's of Electronics.
How'd you gravitate towards the quantum side of electronics? Because presumably it doesn't happen immediately. You've probably tried a few things. There's a lot of different kinds of electronics engineering. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I was really interested in semiconductors and RF electronics and computing. Then I took a honours project with the team at UNSW, the team of Andrew Dzurak.
Mm-hmm.
They were obviously working on quantum computing, and I took a project there and really loved the team and the technology. While I was doing that, I found sort of challenges in that technology that I hadn't seen before. It was breaking a lot of new ground, working on problems to solve that I couldn't look up the solution in a textbook. I had to actually just think about how to do it. And that was a lot of fun, really enticing, and that got me into it.
Before we talk a little bit about some of the many challenges and what you've come up with recently, I'd like to know, just for clarity's sake, for people who perhaps don't have the benefit of a background as involved with tricky subjects as yours, could you just tell me a couple things about just definitions of what a quantum dot is, what an electron spin is, and how you're using them to make qubits? I know it's probably very basic stuff to you, but probably unfamiliar to a lot of people, I'd guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose, firstly, the material system that we work in is silicon, and silicon MOS, which is the same technology that we use to build standard computer chips. We have a semiconductor, silicon, a material, and then an insulating layer, and then metal on top to control the silicon channel. So normally, if you operated a transistor, you would apply a voltage to a metal electrode above the silicon, and you can use that to control the electrons in the channel of the transistor. And by doing that, you can switch the transistor on and off. What happens if you cool this device down? If you cool it down to only a few degrees above absolute zero, a few Kelvin, then you can get it into a regime where you don't just have a channel of electrons in the silicon layer. The channel of electrons can segment into little puddles, and these little puddles we call a quantum dot. So this is where it's related to the temperature. So at room temperature, which is around 300 Kelvin, all the electrons, all the particles are jiggling around, they're vibrating around, they have a lot of thermal energy. But when you cool it down, that thermal energy reduces a lot, and the electrons stop moving so much, and then they can sit in these little puddles. They're much more still.
Right, and so an electron spin, correct me if I'm wrong, I might be because I'm not an expert in such things, but this is the way that the electron in one of these puddles is pointing?
Yes, so the spin is sort of like it's a magnetic property of the electron, or any what we call a fermion. You can think of it like a magnetic moment of the particle. So if it's not exact, this is not precisely correct, but if you can think of it like it's a spinning top. It's rotating in a certain direction,
yep.
And then that gives it a magnetic moment in that direction. That's the spin, and then we can polarize that, so it's not naturally polarized. It can point in any direction, but if we put a large magnetic field through this electron or around the electron, then the spin wants to point in a certain direction aligned with that magnetic field. And then we can have two, what we call eigenstates, or two basis states for this spin, one aligned with the magnetic field and one anti-parallel.
Okay, and these are representing zeros and ones for computing purposes?
That's right, yeah. This becomes the 1 and the 0 of the quantum bit of the quantum processor.
And again, a fairly basic question for our benefit. What does the approach you've taken lend itself to scalability, which is obviously related to the goal you're very clear about, reaching over 1 billion spin qubits? Tell me about that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, the goal is to build a system with millions or even billions of qubits on a single chip or in a single system. And that's because to have a useful quantum computer, experts doing simulations of algorithms are saying that to really have a useful system, you need tens of millions of physical qubits. So it's really important that the technology in itself is scalable, that you can actually integrate tens of millions of qubits in a single system. Now, what we've actually found in this recent paper is a new way to control the spin qubits that can be done using the wiring that we already integrate into our devices, which means that we don't have to integrate larger structures in the device to be able to control the spins. In the field at the moment, there are two primary sort of leading techniques for controlling spins. One that we've used a lot in our team so far is where you integrate an antenna, a micro antenna, on the device next to the qubits. And you deliver a microwave pulse through that antenna that delivers a microwave magnetic field that controls the spins. I say micro antenna. I mean, it is small, but compared to the qubits, it's very large, on the order of 100 times or more bigger than the qubits themselves. You would need to integrate thousands or tens of thousands of these antennas onto a chip.
A lot of real estate you're taking up.
Yeah, so it becomes a very, very tough integration problem. The other way to do it is you integrate tiny magnets next to the qubits. And what these do is they create a magnetic field gradient around the qubits, and that allows you to apply electric fields to the controlling gate electrodes that sort of move the quantum dots back and forth within that magnetic field gradient. And then that also allows you to control the spins. But it's the same problem. I say tiny magnets, but these magnets are way bigger than the qubits themselves, and it again becomes quite a difficult integration problem.
I'd like to know about the effect that your colleague, Dr. Tuomo Tunti, I hope I'm saying his name right, stumbled onto. Okay, that's right. We'll go with that. Tell me about the effect that he stumbled onto and what's happened in the 2 years of trying to understand and control this.
Yeah, Tuomo did absolutely stumble upon this, and it was quite a surprise when he brought it to the team. Tuomo was working on another project. He was trying to optimize the operation fidelity of our 2-qubit logic gates. And he was trying a lot of things in this campaign, a lot of different device designs and control techniques. But one day he stumbled across quite a strange effect. He saw that in a particular regime, the rotation speed of the spins was increasing quite a lot. This was quite strange. We'd never really seen this before. To do it in this way, just controlling the gate voltages on the device, it was quite a surprise to see this. We typically see a rotation frequency of around 1 megahertz, for example. But Tuomo showed us in this experiment he was getting 40 megahertz, way faster. And it was controllable. So everybody was very interested. As soon as he brought this to us, we were all trying to work out what was going on here. What was the effect behind it? And a big question was, can we do it again? Like, Tuomo just stumbled upon this just by chance, just by accident. But can we engineer a situation in a different device or a different configuration and find this again? So that started off a whole new campaign separate from Tuomo's set of experiments. So we tried a few different devices, a few different configurations. And actually what we found was we could reproduce this effect quite consistently. In almost every device that we tried, we could make it happen again.
And has this led to a patent? Is this something you're looking to protect?
Yes, there is an application on part of it, yes.
Is there anything else you'd like to say about the paper and what you hope it might lead to?
Yeah, we're quite excited about the result. And we've noticed quite a number of people within the field are quite excited about it as well. Sort of the feedback that we've gotten from other experts in the field is that it's something that a lot of people hadn't thought of doing before. So we're quite excited about the extra possibilities that it could open up for the technology as a whole. So what it actually allows us to do is we can control the energy spectrum of quantum dots, and that can allow us to change how we control spin qubits. And this is something that hadn't really been accepted or attempted a lot in the field until now. So two of the quite interesting applications of it are, firstly, it could enable long-range spin-to-spin coupling within a device. And that's because the existing way of doing 2-qubit gates for quantum dot qubits is using the exchange interaction, which, put simply, just involves sort of merging slightly two quantum dots. And in that, whilst they're merged, they have an interaction, which we call the exchange interaction. So that's a very short-range thing. The qubits have to be right next to each other. But when we use this technique of controlling the energy spectrum of the quantum dot and inducing a stronger spin-orbit interaction, then this actually creates a much longer-range electrical interaction. The electric fields created by the quantum dots in this state actually persist over a much larger distance than would be needed for exchange. So potentially we can do 2-qubit operations over at 10 times or more greater distance using this.
So you'd be in microns instead of tens of nanometers?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, without knowing much about the subject, that sounds like it's useful. Next thing I wanted to ask was your co-worker, Dr. Andrei Saraiva, wrote a fascinating article for us end of last year about local strength in CMOS-based qubits and the possibility of maybe using this to develop interest from overseas and provide foundry services. And it's an exciting idea, and I'm not sure how practical it is, but it's very interesting, and I really love the article. So my question is there anything you'd like to add perhaps to this proposition, and do you have a point of view on it?
There's growing enthusiasm for this in Australia. So traditionally, the semiconductor industry has mostly been dominated by other countries, so the US, Taiwan, Korea, countries in Europe. There have been some smaller operations in Australia, and there is some expertise here through organisations such as AMF, the Australian National Fabrication Facility, or companies like Silana. But there is some growing enthusiasm to build some facilities here in Australia, most notably through the AMRF, the Australian Manufacturing Research Facility, which is based at the Western Sydney Aerotropolis. So there's two big projects there. The second of those is actually going to be starting to focus on some semiconductor technologies.
Indeed, they're interested in packaging in the second phase of that facility, I understand.
Yeah, that's right. I suppose Australia would have a long way to go to catch up to some other countries here, but that's not to say that efforts aren't useful. There's actually some quite important potential applications here, especially in cases where it's enticing to have some of that manufacturing capability in Australia.
And so on the subject of foundries and outsourced production, which is pretty common in the semiconductor industry, I'd like to know about your arrangement. I understand you use an overseas partner for making your chips. You hand over the designs, they get it done for you. Australia doesn't have a lot of that sort of thing going on here, and thus it would be very difficult to do that here, and I get it. Could you please tell me if you think it's realistic for Australia to want to develop more chip production? And, you know, if it was up to you, if you had the potential to tell everyone to do what you want, what would you say, you know, in terms of policy making or anything else that might be a good way to encourage this?
I'd say one thing to do is to get started and choose some areas that can be tackled on smaller scale. So the reason I say that is the real top of the industry, where you see T1 foundries like at Intel or TSMC or Samsung, these new facilities can cost more than $10 billion for a single fab. So it's something that we can look towards eventually, but not something that we can just dive into in the near term. If it's an industry that we want to grow over time, it's important that we pick off some smaller pieces of it and start working on it. And this initiative in semiconductor packaging is a good potential opportunity for that. As for Diraq's timeline and roadmap, for us it is important to have that advanced CMOS manufacturing capability. So we're building partnerships with foundries overseas and working to get that moving on a shorter timescale.
I guess this is pretty much the end of the conversation. Before we hang up on each other, I'd love to hear a final word from you, or perhaps if you have something to plug, floor's all yours.
Yes, thank you. So we're working towards building a scalable quantum computer here in Australia. And this relies on a lot of expertise and a lot of support that we're working to build, particularly in the semiconductor industry, also the expertise in quantum simulation and measurement that we're building at the University of New South Wales and in Sydney, but also in the wider community around quantum algorithms and error correction and the high levels of the stack and the way that we can work with partners in building that full technology platform. So we're very excited for the future of what it's going to bring. We're very excited to build a quantum computer over the next few years, next coming decades. It's not a short path. There are many challenges to work out along the way, and there's a lot of scaling to do, but we're very excited for that journey.
Well, we look forward to watching your progress and wish you all the best with it. Will, thank you very much for joining us on AU Manufacturing Conversations. It was nice to talk to you.
Thank you, Brett. Thanks for having me.